Ooh, I can send a request. Awesome. Well, just again to everybody, thank you for joining our 5th tutoring session. Of course, we are hopping on 30 minutes early to talk through our Toltech licensing software opportunities that we have, courtesy of Toltech. And to those of you who had a chance to use this, this is our 3rd year in a row in partnering with Toltech. They've been with us since the beginning and helping us bring the anatomical sciences technology right to your computer. And I think this is just such a great opportunity, since a lot of you probably are like, well, how do I study for the practical, and how do I really get this 3D conceptualization down for the anatomy? And the way to do that is with Toltech software like this, and just work on building that model. So I am so grateful to introduce Laura Weinkle from Toltech. Again, has been with us for 3 years, since the Anato-Bee had started, to walk us through how you can make the most out of this opportunity. And I just highly encourage you to think of questions and drop them in the chat as Laura's going through everything, so that you can get a better sense of how you can use this software. So thank you for joining us, Laura.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Glad to be supporting Anato-Bee and have this opportunity to help you all make a little bit more use of this software while you have it getting ready for your competition. So definitely drop questions in the chat. I also would welcome you to unmute yourself or raise your hand, any of that. We have about 30 minutes to walk through the VH Dissector. So it is going to be focused, but don't hesitate to ask any questions if I haven't touched on something that you're curious about. So if you've registered for Anato-Bee, then you have received a license. The licensing is going out the 1st and 3rd Fridays of every month. With that being said, the batch from this last Friday may not have gone out, just because my colleagues were coming back from a conference and fighting a cold and this and that. So if you haven't gotten your license yet, don't worry. We'll be sure to get those all out on Monday. With that being said, it's not necessary to follow along. It's being recorded, so be sure to check it out after the fact once you have gotten things set up. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to our support group. I'm just going to put that email address in the chat here. It's support@toltech.net, and that's who the email is actually going to be coming from with your licensing details. So you can use that to get up and running on an iPad, on a laptop computer that's Windows or Mac based, to give you that access while you can. Okay, so with that, I'm going to be showing it on my Windows computer today. So this is overall the user interface that you would see on a Windows desktop or laptop. If you have a Mac laptop or a Mac desktop, it'll be very similar, just slight differences between the operating systems. And then if you're working on an iPad, I'll be sure to kind of mention some of the details that relate to where to find things in that version and experience of the software. So first and foremost, when you launch the software, you're going to be working with the visible male data set. And there's actually a total of 3 data sets for you in this software. I'll show you how to toggle between those, but more importantly, get you into learning materials that will be focused and guided and actually switch the data sets for you if you need it. But with that, you have kind of 3 main components to the software. There is going to be a left-sided cross-sections panel. Maybe those aren't going to play such an important role for you, so I'll show you how to close those out if you don't want to look at them. But these are essentially slices through this male body that you see in 3D over here. And these were captured as part of a project through the National Library of Medicine back in the late 80s and early 90s. And so this is a full stack of just digital images through this male donor. It's very similar to what you would see in like a CAT scan or an MRI, or even kind of similar to an X-ray if you're more familiar with that imaging modality. But basically, it gives you a view of looking inside the body to really see the layers, see where structures are with respect to one another, so that you can really understand how how a human body is built up. And then these digital images were actually used to create the 3D model that you see here in the center. And as I mentioned, we're going to be looking at the visible male first anytime we launch the software. And then off to the far right, if you're on a computer system, you'll have your lessons panel. And so this is one place to just call out a difference between the iPad app and computers. That lessons panel is actually going to be positioned on the very right side, left side of your screen on an iPad. with the cross sections and then 3D model to follow. But on computers, it's going to be over here on the right. And this is actually an internet page in the software. So if you ever launch your app and you notice that there's no content in that page, or you're being requested to like a page load error kind of refresh, that just means that you might not be connected to the internet. So always good to check that you have that internet connection, since this is going to be an important space for you to have guided content in the software. But being an internet page, I'll just point out a few things. You've got back and forward buttons. This is actually a URL field. So if you ever want to navigate to the Anato-Bee website, you can certainly do that. I think is it .com or .net?
It'll be
Oops,
.org.
.org. Okay. But you could navigate to the Anato-Bee website and access your materials there just by selecting in that space. And then, like other web browsers, there's a refresh button. So if, again, you hit a page load error or something, and then a home button to take you back to the main page there. Now we're going to dive in and look at some of the resources that are in this lessons panel, and that'll also give us an opportunity to look at the tools that we see up here in this ribbon at the top. I do want to point out, though, these 3 buttons off to the far right in the computer software. These 3 buttons allow you to control which panels are open in the software. And so on iPad, you'll have them as well. They look a little bit different and they're positioned more kind of in the center of the screen on an iPad. But again, they'll allow you to toggle certain panels on or off. So for example, if you want to hide those cross sections, don't hesitate to just click that button. And as you hover over them, it'll tell you exactly which panel it's corresponding to. Now, coming back to this lessons panel, I do want to point out that you've got 3 primary sections in here. The first one at the top is getting started. And so in there is a user reference guide. And if you want to review some of the things that we touch on today or learn a little bit more about how to use the software, this is the best place to come. You can scroll down to go through different topics, or use the hamburger menu that appears in the top right corner to navigate to specific topics. Just clicking that home button to take me back. The next thing that I want to point out is actually going to be the Anato-Bee section. And so in here, you've got a list of some curated content, both learning modules as well as libraries of images that can really help you study for those different topics in the Anato-Bee competition. You've also got an introduction to the VH Dissector tutorial video, so great to click on that link. That's going to be, again, a refresher of what we touch on today. This is a short, nice, focused 7-minute tutorial video that walks you through on how to use the computer version of the software. So don't hesitate to check that out as well. Another reference guide that you have access to in here are the different kind of guides for using the keyboard and mouse for operating the software. So those are PDF resources. If you're inclined, you can print those out from your computer or just reference them and make use of those as you kind of look to figure out how to rotate and do things like that with the 3D anatomy. All right. So I see Dr. Piscura's put a question out to the group, and no worries if you haven't. If you haven't gotten your email, it is going to your Gmail address. And again, use that support@toltech.net email address to reach out to us if you haven't gotten your license or you're having any issues. All right. And I'll just put it out. Any other questions before we move on and look at some of this anatomy content? I don't see that there are any raised hands.
I have a question.
Yeah,
So for the licensing, well, that will be sent through email, right?
correct. Yeah. So when you registered, you had to register with a Gmail address. And if you haven't yet received it, like you registered here in the last two weeks or so, then you may not have received your license yet. But if for some reason you've registered 3 weeks past, 4 weeks past, a month, blah blah blah, just email us at that support and we'll make sure to get your license detailed shared. And then you'll use the product key and download instructions that we send you in an email coming from support@toltech.net to actually download and activate the software on an iPad and a laptop that is either Windows or Mac based. but your license is good for one computer and one iPad.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
I also have a question on that.
Yep.
If you're logging in, do you log in with your email or do you have to go through another?
Great question. So are you on an iPad?
I'm on a Chromebook.
You're on a Chromebook. So unfortunately, Chromebooks aren't going to be compatible with the software product key that you get. So you're not going to be able to like download and activate the software on a Chromebook. But if your family has like a desktop computer, you could certainly use that if it's Mac or Windows based. And then if you have a family iPad or a personal iPad, you could use that product key to activate on there.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Well, if there are more questions, don't hesitate to use that raise hand feature or put them into the chat. We'll come back and let some more live questions happen in a few moments. So in that Anato-Bee section, we talked about some of those user reference guides, but you also have some great learning materials that can really guide your time in the software and help you study the anatomy. The main one that I want to point out today, just for the purposes of time, we can't go through everything, but I do want to point you out to Anatomy Pathways. This is a great set of learning modules that are super interactive, get you studying that anatomy that you're going to be tested on in the competition, and also give you some quizzing options. So let's just choose heart anatomy here as an example. And when I come into this module, I want to point out those red headers. So if you hover over them with your cursor or tapping on them with your finger on an iPad, then you can click and basically see that the view is going to be updated and set for you. Some of these lessons are going to just show you 3D anatomy. Some of the lessons are going to show you 3D and cross-sectional anatomy. And so at this point, I can start to use my interactive tools. By default, Dissect is going to be the tool enabled, but I can also switch over to a highlight tool for identification and highlighting or a pin tool for identification and labeling. So all three of these tools are going to give you identification. That means that as I hover over a structure, for example, here I'm hovering over this bone in the chest. This is part of our breastbone known as the manubrium. And if I move my cursor over then to this arm bone, there I can see the label right at the top of that window telling me it's the humerus on the right side of the body. So again, that's with the Dissect tool, and it'll allow you to identify things in the cross sections as well as that 3D anatomy that you see. So anytime you have your cursor hovering over something, you'll see identification text, and then as soon as you click, you can basically dissect structures off. Now, I've just removed parts of our thoracic cage, so the breastbone and what are known as the costal cartilages. And from here, I can zoom in. I'm just using the scroll wheel on my mouse. You can also use the trackpad on your laptop if that's more comfortable. And as you zoom in, you can get closer. Now, this is a gross anatomy software, so it is advanced, maybe a little bit advanced in some of the terms that you're learning about. But what you have here is basically all of the labeling of the structures of the heart. And you can see how they're highlighted, and that highlighting then also correlates over here on the cross-section images. And you can use your Dissect tool on the cross-section images as well. As I click on those heart structures, if you're paying close attention, they're actually being dissected off of the 3D anatomy as well. So we can actually use the Dissect tool like a hide or reveal, where if we click on other structures, there's the breastbone and that sagittal slice there. I can add it to the 3D or take it away. Again, you can use these other tools to identify as well. The highlight tool will be identification with highlighting and colors. I can click on that tool using my mouse cursor. I can also use a keyboard shortcut, the letter H key, to just turn on that tool. And now, as I either hover over my cross-section slices or my 3D anatomy, I can add highlighting color as I identify those structures. And so finally, and actually really quick call out, if you're playing around with the highlight tool, know that you have a custom color palette as well. So for example, you can choose different colors and highlight various structures in unique colors to kind of create that color schema for yourself. And while Dissect and Highlight give you identification as you're actually hovering over things, the Pin tool will allow you to tag and leave a more permanent label. By default, it's going to grab the gross name of that structure, but if you want to customize it, you can certainly do that. So for example, here we've got a Roman numeral instead of just a numerical character. We can call this, change it up to second rib. And then when we click out, we've got that labeling there for us to see. So within these anatomy pathways modules that we clicked into from the Anato-Bee lesson content, basically we have this opportunity to study all these different structures of the heart in this example. If I use that back button, I can go back to the main index and navigate to different topics. So for example, if I want to come in and look at bony anatomy of the upper extremities, I can click into that lesson. And same concept, those red header sections are going to be clickable and they will change what anatomy we see. Now, in that heart module, we actually saw a donor specimen's heart. So that was a heart from a real body that had been preserved and dissected and that heart taken out. In these bony anatomy modules, what we have instead are dry bone images. And this is going to allow us to explore all of those bony landmarks that like basically lay over a whole bone structure. So the scapula, also known as your, what is it? Your wing bone, I guess. That is the bone we're looking at here in our shoulder. And from here, we've got our pin tool on, but notice that we can also manipulate our 3D anatomy. So as I'm looking at these structures, I can use my mouse to just left click and drag to rotate that bony anatomy. Now, sometimes rotation can be a little bit wonky and crazy, and maybe the 3D model starts spinning out of control. You've got these tools right here, move and rotate, to help you with that. And personally, I love the rotate tool the most. It allows me to do both movement and rotation, but the most important thing that the rotate tool allows me to do is set a pivot point. And so once I've clicked on that tool, either with my mouse cursor or the letter R key on my keyboard, I can then double click with my left mouse click and set a rotation or pivot point. So that can make my experience really smooth. And for those of you on iPads, once you've selected that rotate tool, you probably actually don't even have a move tool. You can just double tap on any 3D anatomy to set that pivot point and make for a smoother rotational experience. Great. So keep in mind, definitely read through that text, use these interactive tools up here at the top, dissect, highlight, and pin as you explore that anatomy in the lesson module and create that kind of study resource for yourself. If you do take the opportunity to do lots of custom highlighting or adding different pins while you explore those structures, know that you've got this bookmark tool right here that will allow you to save a collection of your own custom kind of flashcards for studying and review in the future. So either while you're in here in the moment, you can save bookmarks and then come back to them once you kind of have taken a break and want to come back and study some more. So when you open that tool, you'll have a plus sign right here. And when you click on that plus sign, it'll allow you to add a bookmark. So I'm just going to give it a title because you have to always give your bookmark a title. That's the rule in the software, not my rule personally. And then you'll click that checkbox. And if you want to create any kind of organization in your bookmark tool, then you can use the menu and the new folder option here. And that will allow you to like create a unit on musculoskeletal or circulatory system, for example. All right, and the last thing to point out in these anatomy pathways modules are the self-test labeling exercises. So down here at the bottom, all the way at the bottom of the lesson, you'll see that header self-test. And when you click into these, it's going to allow you to review those concepts, those bony anatomy landmarks in this instance that you just worked through in the module. So we can do drag and drop. And the sound is not going to transfer over in our Zoom session right now, but basically there's sounds to let you know if you got things right or wrong. And you can just basically keep trying until you get all those answers filled in correctly. And you can reset this and take it again and again and again. Nobody is collecting your scores, so don't worry if you get 0% on your first try. The goal here is just to give you an opportunity to study that anatomy that you just took time to review in the lesson itself. All right. I'm going to go ahead and click on my home button here just to come back to the main home page. And are there any questions before I show a couple more things within the software? Okay. So one thing to know about is as you've been playing around in the VH Dissector, maybe you've gone away from that full 3D model and are just trying to kind of get back to the start. And so up here you have a view menu. And when you open that view menu, there's going to be an option here called Restore Factory View. And that's going to just reset it all the way back to the beginning where you have your full 3D cadaver and your cross-section images and whatnot. Now, there are a couple other lessons to spend some time looking at within your Anato-Bee section. The cadaver dissection guide is super helpful. There's more bony anatomy, surface anatomy, all these different topics organized regionally within here. You're more than welcome to explore the dissection and observation sections, but those are really tied to being in a donor lab and doing donor dissection on a human specimen. So don't hesitate to explore. There's no harm in doing that, but I would say the bones, the surface anatomy, and the quizzes sections are going to be really helpful to your time studying and getting ready for the Anato-Bee competition. And then once you're ready to leave there, you can always just click back onto that home page. Muscle Tables is also another great resource. And then generously, the occupational therapy program at Quinnipiac University up in Connecticut has donated some of their content that their graduate students are using. So this is going to be great for reviewing musculoskeletal anatomy, looking at all those different muscles, and thinking about what kind of movements they help act on, create in the body. All right. So I have just a little bit more time with y'all today. I'm going to go ahead and hide that cross sections panel again, and I'm going to hide that, or actually I'm going to leave this open for just a moment. The last tool that I really want to showcase today is the anatomy tool. Now on computers, Windows and Mac, you'll have this button here that kind of just looks like a bust or a head and shoulders. And when you hover over that, it's going to say anatomy. If you're on an iPad, you won't have that button. Instead, your anatomy tool is actually going to be contained within your lessons panel. And if you look all the way down at the bottom of the lessons panel, you'll notice that you have a series of tabs. The first one will be lessons, and that should be what's selected when you're looking at this content that we see here right now, our anatomy and getting started stuff. And then you should also see tabs for index, regions, and systems. And so that basically corresponds to your anatomy tool. Now, when I open this tool in the computer, or if you toggle over to the index tab, you'll basically see what I'm looking at right now on those iPads. And some things to call out. So up here, you have a horizontal ribbon, and in that ribbon, you have controls for showing all of the anatomy or hiding all of the anatomy, as well as jumping between different data sets. And there's 3 total data sets. For the most part, your time in the software can be focused on the male and the female. If you want to look at a specialized brain data set, you can jump into that visible brain one. I'm not going to toggle into these today again for time, but know that you can move through and look at the female body as well as a specialized brain data set there. Now, the anatomy tool is a really attractive tool as you're studying for Anato-Bee. And I will say it's a little bit of a learning curve. So there are some tips and tricks I just want to share today if you are kind of one of those people who really likes to explore and, just kind of be your own discovery motivator in the software. Now, the index list can be a really attractive first place to stop, but I don't actually recommend starting your time spent in the anatomy tool here. And I'll show you 2 reasons why. So let's say that we have the full body up and we are wanting to look at different circulatory system structures. For example, the brachial artery in the arm. Now, I have a looking glass and I can open up a search field and I can type in the term brachial artery, and here I've found it in that list. Fantastic. It's going to highlight in a purple color. When I click on the eyeballs, I can turn that structure on or off. And so I've just clicked on those eyeballs to hide that structure, but I didn't notice anything really changed on the 3D anatomy. Let's see what happens if I click on those sunbursts. Okay, I've highlighted that structure, but again, I don't really see anything having changed on that 3D anatomy. And that's actually because that particular artery in this case is a deep structure. It's deep to a bunch, oops, I've got my pin tool on. I want to turn on dissect. It's deep to a bunch of muscles in the arm. And I'm going to have to like really, really search for that structure. So take home message, anatomy tool, very useful, but there's a great way to use it. Let's look at how to do that right now. And my kind of next take home message is the index list is not the first place to start. You have a regions and a systems organization, and those will typically be a lot more helpful. We're going to use that little eyeball with the slash through it to clear the slate. And let's say that again, we want to look for that brachial artery. I'm going to take a regional approach. That means that I'm going to focus in on just that area of the body where I can find that artery. And I'm going to come to this upper limb section. I'm going to actually expand it by clicking on the plus sign or the caret next to the text. And what I want to do here is build up my view so that I can really appreciate where that brachial artery is. So first, I'm going to click the eyeball there to see bones of the upper limb. If I just use that scroll wheel to zoom out, I can see. And then I'm going to go to the level arteries of the upper limb, and I'm going to click on that eyeball to add in all those arteries. And now we have a really clear view. And so when we come back to the index list and search for that brachial artery, I'm going to switch from our purple color back to our tissue color so that it shows up in a nice red this time. Now that I've searched for that brachial artery, I can click on the sunburst. Oh, it kept it in a purple. Let's try that again. There we go. I clicked on that sunburst to add highlighting, and now I have a really clear view of where to find that brachial artery, and I can see it really clearly against the skeletal system. So don't feel like you have to use this tool, but if you do want to, definitely start with regions or systems, opening up those organizations to kind of set the view and build up to a specific set of structures. Now, any questions? I've got one more thing to show. We got started a little bit past 3:30 Mountain Time. So I'm going to wrap up here in the next 5 minutes so that y'all can move on to the next part of your study session. All right, and I don't see any questions in the chat and no raised hands. Okay, very last thing to show. So I talked about the anatomy lessons. Definitely check those out, anatomy pathways, cadaver dissection guide, and so on. The last thing I kind of want to point out is in the getting started section, you have a collection of views known as virtual prosections. This is going to be a library of views that you can definitely study off of. Now, importantly, there's not really any lesson material here that's going to tell you what the humerus bone is and what it does and what muscles attach to it. That content's really going to be found in anatomy pathways or muscle tables, for example. But if you just want to study the upper limb, for example, the nerves, the arteries, the veins, the muscles, all the bones, then this virtual prosections collection is a great place for you to come and find those views for you to easily then use your dissect, highlight, and pin tools to review and study that anatomy. So again, I can rotate using the left mouse click. And if I turn on that rotate tool there, I can set a pivot point so that it rotates really smoothly for myself. I can use my highlight button to identify and highlight different structures or my pin tool as well. And there's a lot of content, not just upper limb. If we go back to that main index in the virtual prosections collection, you'll notice that there is systemically organized content. So that's going to be whole systems like the whole skeletal system or the whole circulatory system or the nervous system. And then there's regionally focused anatomy views. So again, kind of one area of the body to really look at just the arm or the head or in the abdomen, which is like the trunk and where you'll find like your stomach and your liver and all those internal organs. So lots of great resources to help you move along and get ready for that competition. And with that, I would like to just go ahead and wrap up, see if there are any final questions for me as we show off the VH Dissector software.
The only thing I was going to ask, Laura, thank you so much for sharing all that. I thought that was incredibly helpful. I love how easy to use the software is and all the different tools. So we have a badge. We have a badge program that we're running that's new this year. And a lot of you guys might have seen on our website and also in the Google groups that there's a badge you can get called the Curious Bee. And this is for those who have downloaded and activated their Toltech license. You're earning that badge because it's showing that you're putting yourself out there to learn this technology that is at a level of what a lot of medical institutions are navigating. A lot of our medical students are using it. So that is an accomplishment worth celebrating. The fact that you're getting accustomed to using this and learning again more of that 3D application of the human body. So we have it in there where in order to receive the badge, you must register with Toltech and then upload a screenshot of the registration page. Laura, do you mind showing what would be the best way to kind of upload proof of registration?
Yeah, that's a great question. So honestly, I would say once you get your software activated, we'll be able to tell that on our side of things. But for you to actually showcase what you've done, there's a couple different screenshots that you could do. I just used that view menu again to restore factory view and kind of get back to the main screen. I would recommend you could definitely take a screenshot of this. And, maybe if you want to make sure that you're actually showing how you are curious, you could use different tools to kind of customize the view or jump into one of the lessons. So kind of jump around and don't just give that default view. There are also ways to take images right out of the software. So if you don't want to just do a screen capture using like the snipping tool on your Windows machine or like a screenshot on your iPad, then you could come over to the file menu, which is going to be over here in the top left corner of the computer software. And there is a save dissection image option. So let's say, for example, you've gone into virtual prosections, systemic, and you're looking at the skull. There's your custom view. Maybe you've done some unique highlighting, giving bones different colors. When you come over to that file menu, then you can save dissection image. That's going to be the 3D. And that is going to export as a file on your computer. You can put it right on your desktop and then upload that to the Anato-Bee website to get that VH Dissector Curious Bee badge.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Oh,
I'm
Yep.
sorry. I just wanted to say thank you, Laura, for coming in. And I wanted to let everybody know that so just keep in mind, anatomy is giving you, we're helping you learn anatomy and tutoring and getting ready for the competition, but a lot of this is experience. The VH Dissector is what we actually use at a lot of medical schools. So I work at Thomas Jefferson, and sorry, my kids are trying to play with music now, but I work at Thomas Jefferson and we utilize VH Dissector in the lab with the medical students. We use it as our dissector. So I would say, just keep that in mind. Like, you are actually utilizing stuff, and now my kids are giving me background music, but you're actually utilizing software that we utilize in the medical curriculum. So I'll end it at that. But thank you so much, Laura.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I guess just to echo what Dr. Piscura and Dr. Haggerty have shared there, this software is used by medical school students across the United States at about 30% of the medical schools, and both allopathic, so that's MD, as well as osteopathic, that's DO. This is also used by physical therapy students, occupational therapy students, physician assistant students, students in an undergraduate anatomy and physiology course at different universities across the United States. So it's a really great exposure for you as you kind of both get ready for your anatomy competition. But for those of you who are looking towards community college or university and potentially then like a terminal degree in a graduate healthcare profession program, this time that you can spend here will set you up for success for any of those future opportunities. With that, I'll go ahead and drop myself or mute myself, and I will be excusing myself from the rest of the session. Thank you so much, everybody. Good luck. And again, I'll just put the email address in case some of you came in late. If you haven't gotten your license or you have any issues getting it up and running, have any questions, support@toltech.net. All right, everybody, thanks so much for your time. Now I got to find my Zoom controls. There we go. Okay, take care.
Thank you so much, Laura.
Sure thing.
All right. So that was so awesome. Laura and Toltech have been with us since the initiation of the Anato-Bee, and I think this tutorial was so helpful in helping us see how we can use it actually to its maximum potential. So if you have any questions, just like Laura said, reach out to her, reach out to us if we can help you with anything. With that, I'll keep announcements just very, very brief because we have a really awesome presentation prepared for you guys in the cardiovascular system. So with that, we're going to be talking about the heart and lungs tonight. And I just wanted to say how awesome it has been to be in these groups this year and how wonderful both the presenters, but also you as participants have done. I think there's just a general consensus with us from Anato-Bee that these have been some of the most fun sessions that we've had. And it's because you guys are asking very targeted questions, very relevant questions for where you should be out for the Anato-Bee. And we're just incredibly proud of you guys for navigating this, again, on your Sunday evenings and beyond. So thank you so much for making these sessions what they have been and making this an excellent year. We are really excited for, again, cardiovascular system and all the very clinically relevant things that come out of this pathway as well. So with that, I'll let our moderator, Dr. Frank, thank you for joining us again. If you can kick us off.
Okay, well, as Dr. Piscura said, I will be your humble moderator again for this evening, and I have the pleasure of announcing our first presenter that's going to be covering the anatomy of the cardiovascular system. That is Deeba Mohseni. Deeba is from Johnson City, Tennessee. She graduated from East Tennessee State University in 2022 with a BS in Human Health and minors in Music and Culture and Health. She is currently a second-year medical student at the Sidney Kimmel Medical College at Thomas Jefferson University, with an interest in pediatrics. In her free time, she likes to bake, play soccer, and hang out with her friends and family. So with that, Deeba, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. My name is Deeba. Feel free to stop me at any time for questions or anything like that. And I will share my screen now. All right.
Deeba, I
Yes.
will handle your polls for you, if that's okay.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. All right. So we're going to be talking about anatomy of the cardiovascular system. So first, these are our learning objectives. So identifying internal and external structures of the heart, and their functions, pathway of the blood through the heart, main arteries and veins, and then great vessels and their branches. So our first question here is, which of the following points to the mitral valve? Okay, if that's enough time, we're going to show the answer. So, okay, all right. So the correct answer here was D. So we will go on to the next slide and just show you what was highlighted. So the mitral valve, so mitral and tricuspid valves are the valves that you have in between the atria and the ventricles. I believe that this aortic semilunar valve was answer choice C, which was another like highly picked answer. So that one, so these valves, if you notice, are named for what they're going to. So this aortic semilunar valve opens up into the aorta. This pulmonary semilunar valve opens up into the pulmonary arteries. Does that make sense for everyone? Okay. Alrighty. Next question. Now, what is the function of the structure marked with the A? A couple seconds here. This one may be a little more challenging because this is, a real heart and it's not just a picture coming out of a textbook. So we will go on to the right answer. This one, you guys are doing great. Yeah, so first of all, so the structure marked A is the aorta. And the aorta sends blood to the whole body. So show you this here. So yeah, this is the ascending aorta. This was the pulmonary trunk. And the way that you can kind of tell the difference between the two is the pulmonary trunk kind of goes more kind of straight across, and the aorta will come like up and around and down. So now we're going to do a little bit of a review. So what are the functions of the following structures? So which structure would bring blood from the lungs? You can feel free to unmute yourself and chime in. If not, I'll just go through it.
Or you can put it in the chat if you'd like.
Okay. So blood from the lungs, there you go. From the lungs to the heart is the veins. So if we remember the A in artery, this is the way I remember it. The A in artery stands for away. So you're bringing blood away from the heart. So now, what brings blood from the upper body into the heart? There you go. Very good. Superior vena cava. Great. So now, based on what I just told you about the arteries and how I remember it, what sends blood to the lungs? Yeah, there we go. Pulmonary artery. Great job. Okay, last one. What sends blood to the body? Yeah, aorta. Very good. Very good, guys. I did see a question in the chat about in this picture where the superior and inferior vena cava are. Can't see it super great on this picture, but right here. So the atria are kind of more positioned on the back side of the heart, and your vena cava are bringing blood into the atria directly. So those are more kind of on the back side of the heart, more so than the front. That's actually a great question because that's a great way to get yourself oriented is when you're looking at it, trying to figure out, well, where's the front, where's the back? If you see this ascending aorta, that is a great clue that this is the front of the heart, the anterior side of the heart. And then if you're seeing vena cava that are kind of coming into the atria from the back, then that gives you a great hint that that is the posterior side of the heart. All right. Question 3. So this C, this box right here, what is this pointing to? This one's probably a little more challenging, but I think you guys got it. Another couple seconds here for the answers. So this is the visceral serous pericardium. And all right, so this is it's great that you guys chose C because this is a great kind of teaching point is so anytime you see visceral, viscera means organ. So if you've ever, and this is, you know, a little bit morbid, but there's like the very old like torturing method called evisceration. They would like pull your organs out. So viscera is organ. That's how I kind of remember that viscera means organ. So if you see that something is right on top of the organ that you're talking about, then that is the visceral layer, no matter what. So yeah, it's hard in like a real heart to differentiate or actually like see that there is something adhered to the heart, as you would see like in a visceral layer. But you know, if they're like, oh, there is something on this heart and it's on it, then you know that that should be like the visceral layer. And then here is, I'm not too sure how in depth you guys need to know this. I thought this was a great mnemonic for the layers of the pericardial sac, because if you guys remember, the pericardial sac is just like where the heart kind of lives, and it helps it to like pump a little bit easier. So from the outside to the inside, you can go fart, police, smell, villains. So you have the fibrous pericardium, parietal layer of the pericardium, and then you have the pericardial cavity, and then you'll have serous fluid inside of the pericardial cavity. And then you'll go on to the visceral pericardium, which is what that question was pointing at, which is that layer right on top of the heart. Alrighty, next question. Blood circulation through the heart. Which side of the blood which side of the heart carries deoxygenated blood? Another couple seconds here. Excellent job. So this is just kind of showing you blood flow through the heart. If we kind of remember, so the aorta is attached to the left side of the heart. So if your aorta is pumping blood to your whole body, then you want your whole body to have oxygen. So that is why the right side of your heart has deoxygenated blood, because you're bringing it in on the right side, and the right side is going to pump to the lungs to bring the oxygen back into the left side. All right, next question. You guys are doing great. Which set of pulmonary blood vessels carries oxygenated blood? Yes, another few seconds here. All right. So correct answer here is the pulmonary veins. And so this is kind of, I honestly think figuring out which side is oxygenated and which side is deoxygenated is like, once you've got that, like, I think a big chunk of this is kind of out of the way. So from what we talked about before, your artery takes it away. And the first words of pulmonary tells you that it's either going to or coming from the lungs. So the pulmonary means it's involving the lungs. The artery part tells you that it's going away from the heart and to the lungs. So here is just kind of reminding you of that. So any artery takes blood away from the heart. Pulmonary tells you where the blood is going, which is to the lungs. And then the lungs gives you oxygen. So therefore, when the blood is returning from the lungs, it's going to be carried in pulmonary veins. I think some places will kind of teach you that like, oh, arteries always have oxygen, or, you know, stuff like that. I feel like that's maybe a little more confusing. So I just like to remember kind of the direction that it's flowing. And then from there, I can figure out, you know, should there be oxygen here or not? All right. Next question. Which valve is the last one that blood has to flow through to get to the body? And a little bonus question. You can think about it in your head. You can put it in the chat, unmute yourself, whatever. So what would this mean structurally for the heart? Okay, a few more seconds here. Okay. So this, great job. Yeah, aorta. So, like I said, I think it was the first question, the aortic valve leads into the aorta, and your aorta is pumping blood to your entire body. Yeah, so someone did DM me that the aortic valve leads to the aorta. So structurally, this would mean that the muscular layer of the heart on the left side has to be a lot thicker, which is why you can see in this picture right here that there is kind of like a point to the heart and it's pointing to the left. And again, that's because when you're pumping to the whole body, because if you think about it, your heart is kind of like, you know, a little higher up in your chest, and it's got to go all the way down to your toes. It's got to go all the way up to all the little parts of your brain. So you need a really, really thick muscular layer. So you have this apex of the heart, which is to the left. If you think about it, it's just like going to the gym. You know, you're lifting a lot more and heavier, so then your muscles are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. All right. Next question here. You're the medical student in the emergency department. Patient comes in and they're complaining of chest pain. ER doctor tells you that the patient is confirmed to be having a heart attack in the anterior interventricular artery. So which of the following arteries would this be on the picture right here? Okay, another couple seconds here. All right. So this one, correct answer is D. And then we will go into the next. Okay, so this one was a little challenging. I honestly, these still kind of confuse me sometimes. So we'll go on to the next slide, and this should kind of help you out a little bit. So again, we're going to kind of orient ourselves. So this is the apex, and it's sitting to the left. So then this would be the right coronary artery. If we go back to our question, this is talking about the anterior interventricular artery. So I kind of work my way backwards. So anterior means it's the front side. And we can see that this is the front side because you can very clearly see that aorta. You can see your pulmonary trunk right here coming out the anterior side. So interventricular should be in between the two ventricles. So should be this one going right down here. And they all kind of travel, you know, with their own veins. But A is pointing to the right coronary artery. C is this one pointing to the left coronary artery. If you chose C, you were on the right track because this anterior interventricular artery does come off of the left coronary artery. And then B, so it's pointing to the right marginal artery. The good thing about these arteries is they kind of tell you what they're doing. So right marginal, so the margin, kind of the outside, and it's on the right. And that comes off of the right coronary artery. Great job, guys. Couple more questions here. So you have a patient, they're in your family medicine clinic, and they tell you that they were previously told they had a minor occlusion of the artery that supplies first part of the electrical conducting system of the heart. So in order to help them like understand their health better, you're going to tell them that one of their arteries was occluded. So which one would you tell them? This one's a little bit harder, so don't worry if you're kind of looking at this and thinking, oh, I have no idea where to even start. Someone did ask, why are the divisions of the same artery called different arteries? someone else might have a better answer for you. My understanding is kind of it's unknown, and as they in throughout your body, as the arteries are passing certain structures, they change their name. Again, I don't really know why. I don't know if there's a good like structural answer to it, or if that's just like kind of how the naming went.
Yeah, that's a good question. Why do we have to keep changing name? One example is that I know really frustrates students is when we're talking about the brachial artery, for example, it changes from axillary to brachial. It's the same vessel, but at an anatomical landmark, you're just going to change names once we cross that lateral border of teres major. So why do we do that? It's really helpful if we know where a blockage is in one area versus another. If one's in a distal branch versus one's in the main branch, each individual portion is known to perfuse and supply the oxygenation and nutrients needed to those structures. And depending on where a blockage could be, you could have very different clinical implications. If you have a blockage in the axillary artery, for example, nothing distal is going to be able to get perfused. If you have one in the brachial artery, but it's a little bit lower, there's another artery, the deep brachial artery, that might come off, and that has anastomosis with structures further down, and you might actually not end up with complete loss of circulation to the distal extremity. So that's a good question.
Great question. Thank you for that answer. I think if you ask any med student, they just say to make your life harder, but that is a great real answer to that.
I love that.
Alrighty, so you guys are doing awesome. So the correct answer here is the right coronary artery. And so unfortunately, I don't have a great picture of the electrical conducting system of the heart. So the first part of your electrical conducting system is the SA node, and that is right about in this area. SA stands for sinoatrial. So yeah, I don't know that you guys need to know this in depth, but I mean, you guys are doing, really, you know it anyway, so you guys are doing great. Alrighty, next question. So you're studying for your cardiac anatomy exam. You're trying to figure out how to pair the arteries and veins that supply the heart. So you remember a couple of pictures ago, I said that the arteries usually have a vein paired with it. So which of the following answer choices pairs the arteries and the veins together correctly? A couple more seconds. This question was more so, this is how I organize it in my mind, because if I know, this artery is paired with this vein, and I know for sure that this is the location of this artery, then automatically I also know the vein. If your brain doesn't work like that, do not worry at all. It's okay. This is just how my brain thinks. I thought I would introduce that to you guys. So majority of you chose B. Correct answer here is A. So we will go onto this right here. So in this one, you have your great cardiac vein going with the anterior interventricular artery. And so the way that I remember it is just that your anterior interventricular artery is usually the one that is included in those huge heart attacks that you have. That's called the widowmaker. And so if it's so big, the great cardiac vein has to go along with it. Let's see what else we had. And just for your reference, LAD and anterior interventricular artery are the same. Some people just call it different things. Then middle cardiac vein and posterior descending artery. So this would be backside. So this is middle cardiac vein right here with the posterior interventricular artery. It's the same thing as the posterior descending artery. And then your small cardiac vein and your right marginal artery. So if we remember from a couple questions ago, this is your right marginal artery, and the right side, kind of on the outside, for the margin of it. And then that traveled along with this small cardiac vein. I remember that just kind of the margin. If you think about on a paper, the margins are kind of small. So the right marginal and your small cardiac vein go together. by connect, you mean via capillaries are generally in the same area. If you can expand on that would be great, because I'm not 100% sure what you are referring to. But I would be happy to clarify. Okay. Hopefully that kind of made sense. Again, if you didn't get this one, don't worry about it. This is just how I remember it. You do not have to remember it the same way. So next question, which of the following is not a branch off of the aorta? Another couple seconds here. Guys are doing awesome. All right, since we're running short on time, we'll go on to the next one. So this is the right common carotid. Okay, so this one was maybe a little bit more confusing, but hopefully this picture will kind of clear some things up. So you have, this is kind of like your ABCs. So you have your A for aorta or aortic arch. Your B is your brachiocephalic trunk. C is for left common carotid. And then the S and ABCs is for your left subclavian. And the way that I remember it, if it's left or right, is, you remember the apex of your heart is on the left. So your aorta will also kind of go towards the left side. So that's how I remember that left common carotid and left subclavian are coming off of the aorta directly. And it's not right subclavian, right common carotid. Alrighty, I believe it's the last question here. So which of the following great vessels drains into the right atrium? Okay. And we'll go ahead and put the answer. This one is inferior. Great job. I knew you guys would get this one. So this one maybe like a little bit more confusing, but especially if you didn't see, I would have looked at it and went, oh, I meant the superior vena cava. Your inferior and superior vena cava both drain into the right atrium. And from there, it will go into the left ventricle. And then from the left ventricle to the lungs, and then left atrium, it comes back from the lungs. So with that, I believe that was my last question for you guys. Now, if you guys have any questions for me, be happy to answer.
I want to first say excellent job, Deeba, and thank you for putting together these questions. I know we got through a lot of questions in a short period of time, but I think, Deeba, you did an excellent job in putting together a lot more complex level questions, as well as some that are a little bit easier. So I think that's a good range in terms of what you guys can expect. And I just want to reiterate again that it doesn't matter whether you got them right or wrong now, but thank you again, Deeba, for putting those questions out there so that we can learn from them tonight. So we still have a couple more minutes if you guys have any questions for Deeba.
I have a question. So I'm taking anatomy and physiology like a high school class right now, and so far we've only gone over integumentary system and skeletal system, so we haven't really reached the cardiovascular system yet. So I wasn't really like familiar with a lot of the things. Well, I took human body systems last year, but I kind of forgot some of that stuff. So like how would you recommend like studying for the cardiovascular system?
Yeah. So honestly, the way that I hope a good picture here. So I would kind of start here and just see like what, and I feel like the way that I learn things is I like to learn one or two like principles and then apply that everywhere. So like what I was saying, that the apex of the heart is to the left because you need that thick muscle to pump to the whole body. So then I know, oh, well, we're pumping to the whole body, so there has to be oxygen. So if there has to be oxygen on the left side, you have to bring deoxygenated somewhere. So that's going to be the right side. And then there are probably some really good YouTube videos out there if you are more of like a video learner. One of the resources that I use, I don't know if he has like a more basic level video, but Ninja Nerd on YouTube, he's great. He explains everything in a ton of detail. Yeah, so he, especially if you're very much like, I need someone to talk me through this, that is a great way to do it. If not, you can kind of these arrows, I like these a lot because it'll kind of work you through like where it's going and stuff like that. Does that kind of help?
Mhm.
Okay, great.
Another thing I'll
Thank
put out there
you.
too is if this is your first time joining with us, that just as a reminder to everybody that we do recommend watching our the Anato-Bee videos from the previous years. In previous years, we had done videos where we took the time to explain this content. So now that we have the recordings of those, we have those listed on our YouTube channel that you can go in the playlist and navigate. Those are really helpful because they definitely cover the same learning objectives that we're stating. As Deeba had said, I love Ninja Nerd, Draw It to Know It, things like that. And the last thing that I would say for the heart that I think is really helpful is instead of just studying what things are and just saying, okay, the superior vena cava is draining blood back to the right atrium. That's just a fact. And that's a lot of Latin words, and it doesn't really have a lot of meaning to us right now. But if you spend time in just saying, okay, there's two really big veins that are bringing blood from the entire body back to the heart. I think starting there and tell a story of what's happening and then walk it through. Okay, and then we're going to go from the right atrium to the right ventricle. And just start with a story of how everything's flowing, and then you can filter in the details later of what vessels specifically are helping us do that. And then also adding in that extra layer of what valve is helping ensure that we're passing at the right time from atrium to ventricle, for example. So, but I think all of Deeba's advice is definitely spot on to just spend some time with it and watch some videos. And again, you have until January to get this content for the anatomy. So take that time to ask your anatomy professor and ask us what your questions are about cardiovascular system.
Okay, thank you. That was really helpful.
Yeah. Any other questions for Deeba before we continue on to histology of the cardiac system? All right, we'll turn things back over to Dr. Frank, and thank you so much again, Deeba.
Thank you guys so much and good luck.
Thank you, Deeba. Okay, as Dr. Paskura said, our next topic will be the histology of the cardiovascular and circulatory system. With us this evening is Laura Brigandi. Laura is from Pottstown, Pennsylvania. She graduated from Northeastern University with her bachelor's and master's degrees in bioengineering and is currently a second-year medical student at Drexel University College of Medicine. In her free time, she likes to go on runs, play pickleball, and bake. Academically, she is interested in anatomy, microbiology, and immunology, and hopes to specialize in emergency medicine. So with that, Laura, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Okay, I'm just going to share my screen and we will begin. Okay, and can everybody see the slides? All right, perfect. So I'm going to be talking about histology of the cardiac and circulatory system. So just to begin, I'll show you an overview of the heart, which we just went over for anatomy. And here is a picture of the circulatory system, kind of showing the interplay of veins and arteries and how the heart pumps blood throughout the body. I'm going to be going over the histology slides. Some of you may have recognized pictures from previous years, but I just want to go over to like further solidify what these histology images look like, and we'll hopefully have some fun questions that can test your knowledge. So first, we'll just go over the learning objectives. So we're going to first be talking about the layers of the heart, so the endocardium, myocardium, and epicardium. Then we're going to move on to the histological layers of vessels. And then lastly, we're going to go into what's called a peripheral blood sample, and we're going to look at what's present in that. So to start, the heart is a muscular pump, and it's made up of different layers with something that's unique to the heart is that it has cardiac muscle. So here's a picture of that cardiac muscle on like a microscopic, like histological level. So you can see that it is branched. You previously had your session on the other types of muscles, smooth and skeletal. So what's unique about cardiac muscle is that it's branched. It has intercalated discs and gap junctions, which help transmit the electrical signal so that there's coordinated conduction of the heart. And so you can kind of see this like line pattern showing the different branches. You can see the nuclei. And I'm just going to go to the next slide. And here's another image where you can kind of see it drawn out to make it a little bit more clear. So you have these lines, which are the intercalated discs, the central nuclei. And then again, it's just this like branch structure, which again helps with that coordinated contraction. And so you saw this image previously, but again, it does a great job of illustrating the layers of the heart. So previously it was talked about the pericardium, but we're really going to focus on the other layers of the heart, not the covering. So we're going to talk about the endocardium. 1 second, let me just minimize this. The epicardium, the myocardium, and the endocardium. So the epicardium is the most superficial layer of the heart. As was mentioned previously, this can be considered the visceral pericardium, and visceral is used when you're discussing something that is covering an organ. And the pericardium is above the epicardium, so that's why this is considered the visceral pericardium. So this is fused to the heart and again comprises that superficial layer. On the microscope, you'll be able to see like a simple squamous epithelium, which in this case is called a mesothelium, which is also containing in the epicardium connective tissue, as well as adipose tissue or fat. And then this is the location of coronary blood vessels. So right here, I believe you can see an artery in the epicardium. The next layer is the myocardium, which is the middle and thickest layer. And this is what is composed of that cardiac muscle cells that I showed you on the previous slides. So from this section, it's kind of a cross section, which is why you can't really see those branching. You can kind of see like looking in. And this layer also contains collagen fibers, blood vessels, and nerves. And this is really what's coordinating that contraction and pumping of blood throughout the heart. And then the next layer, which is the innermost layer of the heart, is called the endocardium. This joins the myocardium with a layer of thin connective tissue. And this layer also lines the chambers of the heart and covers the internal structure of the heart. And this is made of, again, simple squamous epithelium like the epicardium. However, in this case, it is called the endothelium. And the endothelium is continuous with the lining of blood vessels, which I'll demonstrate later on when we discuss the blood vessels. So now getting into questions, I just want to start by asking, let me see if I can move this up. Wait 1 second. Wait. Okay, so a 62-year-old patient develops bacterial endocarditis, an infection that affects the inner lining of the heart and its valves. Microscopic examination shows inflammation of the layer made of simple squamous epithelium and connective tissue. So which layer of the heart is primarily affected? And also feel free to ask any questions in the chat throughout or unmute if you have any questions. All right, so I'm going to give this about 3 more seconds. Okay. Perfect. So we'll review the answers. C. So the majority of you said endocardium. Let's see if that's correct. Ooh, where did I go? And that is correct. So just to go over the other answer choices, or first, let's go over the question stem itself. So I underlined some things that I think are important. So even though you may not know what endocarditis is, it's kind of a clue that has endo in it, meaning that it's affecting the endocardium layer of the heart. This question stem also mentions the inner lining of the heart and simple squamous epithelium, which, as we know, is what lines the endocardium. So the epicardium is also made of simple squamous, but it is the outer layer. So that's important to note. And then the myocardium is the middle layer, which is made of cardiac muscle. And then we didn't really talk about the pericardium, but it was mentioned previously. So you know that the fibrous pericardium is made of tough connective tissue. And then the parietal pericardium is a single layer of epithelial tissue, but it's called mesothelium, and it's not, again, the inner layer of the heart. So for the next question, a young athlete has an enlarged heart muscle due to years of endurance training. The layer that has become thicker consists mostly of branching cardiac muscle cells with intercalated discs that allow for synchronized contractions. Which layer of the heart has hypertrophied, which means enlarged or overgrown? Okay, and I'll just give this like 3 more seconds. All right, choice D, beep, which is myocardium. Let's see. And perfect. So you guys got it, myocardium. And again, the key here is branching cardiac muscle cells with intercalated discs. The myocardium is the only layer of the heart that is containing those cardiac muscle cells and able to coordinate that contraction. All right, and now we're going to move on to the layers of the blood vessel. So again, here's that overview of the circulatory system where we have arteries that are taking blood away from the heart and veins that are taking blood to the heart. At different points in the body, arteries could be carrying oxygenated or deoxygenated blood, and same goes for the veins. It just depends on where you are. So to start, I just want you guys to comment in the chat. What do you see as the difference between these arteries and veins here on the image? Oops, sorry. Let me go back. And I see in the chat also, would hypertrophy of this layer be a bad thing? So it actually can be a bad thing if you have hypertrophy. That thickening can make that ventricle wall a lot thinner or other chambers of the heart thinner, which doesn't allow you to hold and pump as much blood. It's also, if it's thicker, it might not be able to contract as well. And actually an issue that some very athletic people can get is hypertrophy, which can cause sudden cardiac death, unfortunately. All right, so now let's look at your answers. I'm sorry, I accidentally exited out of the slideshow. Yes, artery is round, vein is irregular. That's great. Artery is thicker and more round. Perfect. It seems like you guys got a lot of this that we're noting. So I'm just going to go to the next slide. So of course, yes, the arteries do have thicker walls. As I mentioned previously, they do carry blood away from the heart. And this is a higher pressure system versus the veins. They're thin walled with irregular borders or an irregular lumen. They are in the lower limb, they have valves, and this is because the veins have a lower pressure system and you don't want blood to flow through. You want it to keep going, which is why the valves prevent backflow and they carry blood towards the heart. And then this is just another image of what the actual layers of the arteries and veins look like. So now we're going to get into that. Okay, so the arteries and veins all contain the same 3 layers: the tunica intima, the innermost layer, the tunica media, the medial layer, and the tunica externa, which is the external or outer layer. It's just at different quantities in the blood vessel and the heart, which we'll talk about in a second. So for the tunica intima, On this side, we have the artery, and this side, we have the vein. And so this is the innermost layer, and is made of an endothelial tube of longitudinally arranged squamous epithelial cells. So again, like I mentioned previously with the endocardium, that's made of the endothelium, and this is the continuation as it goes into the circulatory system. So it's separated from the media here by an internal elastic lamina, and then this layer releases things called endolithins that constrict smooth muscle, and this increases blood pressure because if you think about narrowing the lumen, you're going to make it harder for blood to go through, so it's going to go through at a higher pressure. So that can increase the blood pressure. And you can see the intima layer here and in the vein is approximately the same. And now the differences come when we talk about the next layer, which is the tunica media. So this is the middle layer. This contains the smooth muscle cells. So this is what actually is allowing the pushing of like blood through as opposed to just a like stationary tube. This actually allows for like a little bit of squeezing to get the blood through. And as you can see in the artery, the media layer is way bigger than in the vein. You can see it's almost double the size, and this is because the arteries are such a high pressure system. In the arteries, we also have, in both arteries and veins, we have what's called the vasoviscorum, which supplies blood into the other layers in order to have blood so that these vessels can operate, because without blood, they won't be able to function. They won't be able to get oxygen. And then this layer allows, like I said, for contraction and relaxation and allows for changes in blood flow. Again, that's with that constriction or relaxation. And then next we have the outer layer, which is called the tunica externa or the tunica adventitia. You can see both, and that's present here and here. This is the largest layer in the vein, and it is made of connective tissue, fibrocytes, collagen bundles, and elastic fibers. And this is what allows the vessels to be held in place and like really connect to the surroundings. And again, this has that vasa vasorum, which supplies blood to the rest of the vessel. So we're going to go on to our questions. So during a laboratory dissection, you examine a cross-section of an artery under the microscope and the innermost layer containing an internal elastic membrane, and it's composed of an endothelial cell that releases endolithins. Which histological layer of the vessel is being observed? All right, and we'll close this question in 3 seconds. All right, and let's see. And correct, the tunica intima. Just some things to highlight from the question stem. So I highlighted artery because if you have an artery or vein, as you saw previously, you might have more of one layer than the other. Like for arteries, they have a larger tunica media versus the veins have a larger tunica externa. I highlighted endo again and endolithins because again, from the endocardium, that layer comes down and makes the intima. And then again, this is the innermost layer, and that's how you guys came to your conclusion, which was correct. Again, tunica externa is the outer layer, mostly made of connective tissue. The media is the middle with mostly smooth muscle. The elastic lamina is found between the intima and the media. So that would be like right here. And then the lumen is just the space where the passage of blood is. So for our next question, a connective tissue disorder causes distension and pooling of blood in superficial veins. The affected layer contains bundles of smooth muscle cells and elastic fibers arranged circumferentially, helping maintain venous tone. Which layer is damaged? Okay, and I'll give this like 3 more seconds. Okay, so a little bit more debate here. So let's see what the answer is. So the correct answer is the tunica media, which most of you saw. So again, I just want to highlight veins. As I mentioned last time, just you might have a question that makes you question which of the layers is the thickest to determine if it's an artery or vein. This question is asking about smooth muscle cells and elastic fibers arranged circumferentially. And so the middle layer, the tunica media, is the only layer that is containing that smooth muscle. So just keep that in mind. Maybe you can think media, middle muscle, the outer, and then as we went over in the previous questions, intima is the inner layer, externa is the outer layer. The endothelium is on top of the tunica, which has those endothelial or squamous epithelial cells. And then again, the elastic lamina is between the intima and the media layer. So now we're going to go on to our final learning objective, which is discussing the different blood cells found in peripheral blood samples. So here is a picture of what you might see of a peripheral blood sample. So just quickly to go over the components, you have red blood cells, which are also known as erythrocytes. These transport oxygen and carbon dioxide and are found on a magnitude of 10 to the 6 cells per microliter. So a lot. As you can see, they're very numerous. They're anucleated, which means that they do not contain a nucleus, and they're biconcaved, which means that they concave on both sides, forming a U, or like a disc, kind of like a ring. And then you have platelets, which are cellular fragments from thrombocytes, and they assist with blood clotting and they contain clotting factors. And so you have these platelets here, and these are the red blood cells or erythrocytes. And then what's not seen here, but you're going to see in the next few slides, are white blood cells, which are also known as leukocytes. So these have nucleuses. They're used as a defense mechanism against like infection or parasites or other things. They're on the order of 10 to the third cells per microliter. So still a lot, but not as many as red blood cells. And there are two categories known as granulocytes and agranulocytes. So granulocytes means that they are white blood cells or leukocytes that contain granules, and they can release granules. So the first and most numerous is the neutrophil. So there's a 50 to 75% of your total white blood cell count is made up of neutrophils. They are the first at an infection site, and they phagocytose antigen. And phagocytose means to like eat, so like cell eating. And antigen are things present in the blood that can tag different potentially like harmful substances like parasites or infection. And so when they're tagged, the neutrophil can go and attack that. And just to note, they're segmented. So you'll have 2 to 6 irregular segments of the nucleus. As you can see here, these irregular segments. And they have a relatively clear cytoplasm in the peripheral smear. And you can't really visualize the granules. You might be able to see little dots, but you can't readily view them. You have our eosinophils, which is next. Much less of the total white blood cell count, only 1 to 4%. These fight parasitic infections and help with allergic response. So they have a bilobed nucleus. It's not very clear here, but it would only be like 2 little blobs for the nucleus. They have a cytoplasm, which is eosinophilic, so that means like more pink, as you can see here. And then again, you can't really visualize the granules at this like magnitude with the nucleus obscuring it, but you can kind of see those dots stippled in. And then lastly is the basophil, which is the smallest amount of the total white blood cell count. So you'll see less than 1% of these. So they're present for acute inflammation and allergic reactions, and they release histamine and something called an interleukin. And these are bilobe nucleus, so you can see that here, and they're basophilic, which is like darker purple, as you can see the comparison between the pink and the purple. And again, you can't really see the granules, you can kind of see the spotting, but they do have granules there. And then agranulocytes, so these do not have granules, they do not have substances that they're releasing. So first is the lymphocyte, which is 20 to 40% of your total white blood cell count. They appear at infection as well, and they recognize specific antigens and have immunological memory, which means they can re-recognize pathogens or things that are in the blood if they come again. And this is the second most common leukocyte behind neutrophils, and they have a rounded nucleus. And then we have our monocyte, which migrates to infection. It can leave the bloodstream to ingest bacteria and cell debris. And then once it leaves from the bloodstream, it becomes a macrophage. And this is 2 to 8% of the total white blood cell count. It has a large nucleus, and it can kind of vary to look like a kidney bean or a horseshoe shape. And so we'll get into our questions. So, which white blood cell type is first to arrive in large numbers at a site of acute infection and has a segmented nucleus? Okay, and I'll give this 3 more seconds. Perfect, good job. So the neutrophil is the first to arrive and the most abundant, as we said. It's present from 50 to 70% of the white blood cells. The reasons, what I highlighted to note is, again, large numbers, first to arrive for an infection with segmented nucleus. So our basophils are very rare in the blood. Eosinophils release histamine, so they're not going to be present for an infection. And then the lymphocytes arrive around the same time as monocytes. However, they do not have segmented nucleus. So our next question, a patient experiences an allergic reaction. Under the microscope, certain white blood cells release histamine and heparin, substances that increase inflammation and blood flow to the area. Which type of white blood cell is responsible? Okay, I'll give this 3 more seconds. Okay, a little bit of a mix again, so let's see. So the answer is basophil. So the keys to this is allergic reaction, white blood cell, and histamine. So basophils are the only ones of these leukocytes that will release histamine during an allergic reaction, which does cause swelling and increases blood flow. Neutrophils contain granules, but they do not release histamine. Eosinophils also contain granules but do not release histamine. And then for lymphocytes and monocytes, they do not have granules, so they're not going to be releasing anything. And then just a summary of what we've gone over today. So the 3 layers of a typical blood vessel from internal to external. We have our tunica intima, which is an epithelial layer and responds to damage. We have our tunica media, which is smooth muscle cells, which allows for regulation of blood pressure in the periphery. And this is the largest in arteries. And then we have the tunica externa, which have fibrocytes, which produce collagen and anchor the vessel in place. And this is the largest in veins. The 3 layers of the heart from external to internal, we have the epicardium on the outside, which is of simple squamous epithelium. It has adipocytes, which are fat, and the coronary arteries are in there. We next have our myocardium, which is the thickest layer, contains our cardiac muscle cells. And then lastly, on the inside, we have our endocardium, which again contains simple squamous epithelium, and then lines the inside of the heart chambers and the vessels, which is made of the endothelium. And then lastly, we have a review of our peripheral blood smear. So we have red blood cells, which are also called erythrocytes. We have platelets and our leukocytes, which are also called white blood cells. And then they can be split into agranulocytes and granulocytes. So for our granulocytes, we have our neutrophils, which are most abundant, our eosinophils, which are the second most abundant of the granulocytes, and our basophils, which are rare in the blood for acute inflammation and allergic reaction. And then lastly, our agranulocytes, which are our lymphocytes and our monocytes. And as Dr. Frank put in the chat, never let monkeys eat bananas is a great way to remember the leukocytes in a peripheral blood smear. All right, so thank you. And if you guys have any questions, I think I saw something in the chat. Okay. was answered. So
Well, feel free, since we're on the recording, I think I saw someone actually, do we have a question? I saw someone.
Yes, I have a question. Is there any mnemonic or device you use to memorize their functions as well, along with their names?
Hmm.
ooh, unfortunately, I don't have a good mnemonic for that. I think it's just about like repetition, and then once you're able to look at what the granules contain themselves, it should make more sense of what their function is.
Thank you.
Of course.
I would ask if you do find one, let us know, because I think everybody would benefit from that. Great question.
So while we wait and see if anyone's gets inspired to maybe clarify anything else, if you want to, I know you had mentioned that there's some that were already answered, but if you wanted to read those out loud, Laura, and give your 2 cents on those, just so that they can make it their way into the recording. I think there were some good
Sure.
questions in there.
All right, let me just look through.
Are these slideshows posted anywhere?
Yes, all the slides are posted. They will be posted in the Google Classroom. So you'll have access to all of these slide decks and the recording within 24 hours of the session.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
So the one question I see is about, or there's actually a few questions about valves in the veins. So again, this is a great question. Would having valves in the lower limb be useful because blood falls due to gravity? That's another reason. It is a low pressure system, but also with gravity, it can cause all the pooling, and you don't want it to backflow through the system. So that's why you have those valves also. Would valves promote the unidirectional flow? Why aren't the veins also in a high pressure system? So do you mean why aren't there valves in a high pressure system, or why aren't veins considered a high pressure system? I think this was deep sea.
I think I wrote the question understood as why, essentially, why aren't the veins also in a high pressure system? So what factors are contributing to making the arterial system in a high pressure system?
Mm. I think for that, I would say the veins are usually considered like the reservoir of blood. So you actually have like the majority of your blood residing in veins. And you have that, I believe, so that you can kind of constrict and relax the smooth muscle to promote, like, say you have low blood pressure. If you are squeezing that smooth muscle, it promotes increasing the blood pressure. And because you have that reserve of blood in the veins, it allows for that. If you had a high pressure system throughout the whole body, I don't think it would allow for sufficient oxygen exchange in the capillaries. And then everybody, I believe, would have high blood pressure. So it's a good idea to have the veins kind of slow you down and chill you out there.
That's a perfect answer. Thank you, Laura.
Of course. And then that's a great question. I don't really know if basophils are so uncommon, how is the allergic reaction so large? If one of you guys wants to answer this out loud, I don't really know.
Yeah, and this is one that we won't ask you any questions kind of, up to that level of application, but I thought it was a really cool question. It definitely shows that you're thinking about the broader clinical implications of what we're talking about, which is really cool. So the long story short is basically the basophils are going to be a primary detector of those, and they're the ones that are going to be triggering the release of chemicals that then are recruiting other immune cells to come into play. So really good question. None of these cells are working completely independently. And so I know we'll mention their function independently, but in truth, they're a part of your immune system that are functioning as a unit essentially to ensure that your body's responding accordingly to any threats or things that should be removed. So I don't know if you have any other thoughts, Dr. Frank, to that one.
I was just going to say I put a kind of a lengthy explanation in there, but basically they're small in number, but they're very effective because they release the inflammatory mediators, that they will cause a large reaction. So they are small but mighty. So how's that?
I like that. And
I
I
see
see we
we
do have a
also,
new question in there for you, Laura.
yeah. So does blood flow at the same rate throughout the body? Would a faster flow close? Would blood flow faster close the heart? So there are not, the blood flow is not the same throughout the body. It really depends on the diameter of the vessel. So the larger the diameter, the slower blood will move through it. And the smaller the diameter, the faster blood will move through it because that creates more pressure and backflow. So for a place like the aorta, it is high pressure because the left ventricle is squeezing through. But a place that is smaller would actually have a faster flow. And then I see, isn't the histamine production that causes the allergic reaction, not the basophil? Yes, so the histamine, well, so I'm pretty sure from the environment you'll get that histamine into your body and that triggers the reaction. If I'm not correct, I think that's correct.
So some things will then trigger a histamine release, and then that's why antihistamines will be effective treatment for those. But I like your point there, Sammy, adding in that it's the basophils are kind of triggering that cascade of reactions, but they're not the ones that are doing, like Dr. Frank had said, they're the ones, they're small, but they're mighty in that they're kind of causing this domino effect of reactions. And Sammy, I think you got your hand up there. Did you have a question for Laura?
Oh, it was actually about what I just said. It's funny that as soon as I said that, Dr. I was trying to make Dr. Frank said talk more about it. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Clock it. Okay. But yeah, that was really it on that. But yeah, I thought it because when I saw the question, I was like, it's histamine production, not the baso. But it's only because I like to call everything in medicine a snowball effect. It kind of just like, hey, we need you over here, and then they, come and sense it. Yeah. So, anyways, but he explained it, so I was just like, okay, sorry, my bad.
No,
But anyway.
you're fine. And then we've got time for probably one more question here was, I see we've got, how would having low blood pressure affect blood flow?
So when you have low blood pressure, that is also like low blood flow through the body. And your body actually will compensate by releasing those mediators to constrict the vessels so that, like I mentioned, if you have a smaller diameter, that's going to increase the pressure and that's going to bring up the blood pressure. So that's how having low blood pressure would affect blood flow, and your body compensates because you don't want to have that low blood flow because you're not delivering oxygen effectively and you're going to have symptoms from that.
And I just wanted to add that there's some physics in there. So flow through a pipe, the smaller the diameter, the faster the flow, the larger the diameter, the slower the flow. Opposite in the neurons, but in the vascular system, it is the smaller the diameter, the faster the flow.
One way you can test that is if you guys go out to a garden hose and you turn the water on and you just turn it on normal amount and put your thumb partially over the, or try to, if you put a adapter on, like if you're looking at a, like a pressure washer, the reason why that's working essentially is it's forcing it through a very, very tiny space. But you can even mimic some of that by putting your thumb over and forcing the water to go through a smaller space than what it had before. So that's a really cool point to bring up, Dr. Frank, that definitely is something that you can encounter in your undergraduate physics courses as well, that's describing how our bodies work. So awesome job, Laura. I really appreciate, again, all the questions that you had put together and the very clinically relevant questions you had. And I was super impressed by how everyone was navigating some of those, especially higher level questions. So awesome job, everybody. And whether you got them right or wrong, again, it's just really awesome that you're putting yourself through this experience and hopefully are walking away from Laura's session with a little bit more knowledge than before. All right, well, thank you, Laura. Dr. Frank, are you ready to kickstart our final session for the evening?
I sure am, and I have to apologize for regressing a little bit, but our next presenter, when I say her name, it reminded me of an Alan Clark song from the Generation Love Revival album. It's actually the fifth track off of it because I just checked it. So nothing gets past me. Mind of steel trap here, but it's called Get Your Savvy On. So with that, we are going to get our savvy on, and giving the embryology portion of the cardiovascular system is going to be Savannah Gregory, also known as Savvy Gregory. Savvy is from Nashville, Tennessee, and graduated from the University of Alabama at Birmingham, majoring in biology. She is currently a second-year medical student at the Edward Via College Osteopathic Medicine in Auburn, Alabama, with an interest in anesthesiology. In her free time, she enjoys reading and spending time with her cats and budgies. Okay, maybe you could tell me what budgie is. So her favorite part of anatomy is learning the vasculature and how the body is wired, and give the floor to Savvy.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. So a budgie is just a little parakeet. I rescued a couple months ago, so just been hanging out with them and teaching them how to like come to my fingers. So I'm gonna go ahead and try and share my screen. Everyone did such a good job doing that, so I'm hoping this works. Did that work?
There we go. I can see it in slideshow mode.
Okay. So y'all can see this. All right, then I'm gonna go ahead and get started. And if y'all have any questions for me at any point, don't hesitate to stop me and just feel free to ask. Okay, so we're gonna be talking about the embryology of the cardiovascular system. These are our learning objectives for the night. And before we start, I just wanna say embryology, it has a lot of details, and I kind of think of it as tonight we're going to be taking a snapshot of what's happening. So a lot of these things are occurring at the same time. And right now we're just going to be looking at one scene of the movie, and that scene is going to be cardiac development. So we can just go ahead and jump right on in. I know that this has been talked about a little bit tonight. I don't know if someone else is doing the poll, but so question one. So the primary heart field is made up of what embryonic tissue layer? Okay. Is there a way for me to see the poll at the same time that? Let's see. Okay. Can y'all still see the slides?
Yeah.
Or did it change?
Back into presentation mode, then once we see an adequate number of people have responded, we can close the poll for you, and then we'll share them, and you should be able to see what everybody's got.
Yeah, Savvy, you can't see the poll.
Okay.
Now, if you make her a co-host, then she'll see the same screen that we do there as people are responding.
I will definitely do that right now.
Okay. Yes. Thanks, Dr. Frank.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Despite my name, I'm not tech savvy.
The poll is ended. Can you see it?
I cannot, but I would have to exit out of slideshow to see it.
That's all right. We can walk you through this one and see if it applies with the next one, since she's your co-host now. So for this one, we had 28% with A, 50% with B, 6% with C, and 17% with D. So predominantly choice B here.
Okay, so the correct answer is D. I know we've talked about this, but I think it's important to start with the different embryologic layers. So the heart's primary heart field is going to be starting here in this cardiogenic area. If you want to, I think I heard that most people picked B, which is endoderm, and that's a really good line of thought. But our endoderm is what we like to call the inner layer, and that is going to form a lot of our organs. It'll be things such as our muscles and our bones. And I like to think of the ectoderm as the outer layer, which is going to form things like the skin. Mesoderm, so this is the simplified form. It's actually mesoderm is going to be broken down, and we'll see that in a picture coming up. It's going to be our splanchnic mesoderm, and this is our middle layer. I think somebody said it earlier, but I like to think of mesoderm as middle, muscle, and M for middle and muscle. So this picture is going to break it down a little bit for us. So this is our neural tube. This is what's going to form eventually the brain and the spinal cord. And the snapshot of the heart that we're looking at tonight is going to be out here. So our mesoderm, it's going to be the lateral plate mesoderm, and it divides into these. They do other things, but for the heart, we're going to be focusing here on our splanchnic. And that is what's going to be forming the primary heart field. Now, the primary heart field is going to be found here in the cardiogenic area.
Do you have
This is just,
I'm sorry, Savvy, to interrupt.
Savvy, yeah.
I think your
Sorry.
presentation just stopped sharing. Do you mind trying to see if it'll let you reshare your screen?
sorry, yeah, let's see here. Okay. Do you want me to do like the entire screen? Maybe that'll help.
I don't know, maybe it was just when we were adding you as a co-host, maybe it just needed a reset there, but I can see what you're doing now. Perfect.
Is that better?
Yeah, perfect. And then going back to kind of what you're screen for, do you mind just going back and just repointing out on the previous slide with where you're talking about with mesoderm, just to get them kind of situated with where that is too?
Okay, yes. This one.
The one more slide before, I think that's when it cut out. So just repointing out the stuff that you just did on these images, and then we'll be all back on track again. Thanks, Savvy.
Okay, yeah, no problem. Sorry about that. So just to reiterate what I said before, so we're going to be looking, this is a dorsal view. I should state that first. And I like to think of this, I think one of the hardest parts about embryology is just orienting yourself to like the spatial awareness around you. So I think of it like this, a dorsal view is like a dorsal fin. So in my mind, I think of a shark, and the dorsal fin is on the back of the shark. So if you want to think about it like that, we're kind of looking at the back view of this developmental area. So this is going to be the cardiogenic area, which is where our mesoderm is going to kind of be, those cells are going to be migrating to this area very early on in the development. And then this is going to be happening at the cranial end or the head end, and this is down here towards the tail or the caudal end. This is the exact same image as this. It's just a transverse view. So what I like to think about for a transverse view is like a bagel. And let's say our bagel, you know, they're cut in half, and so you have a top half and a bottom half. And so a transverse view would be like taking the top half of that bagel off and just looking at it in space. So we're looking at something kind of in that plane of motion. So here you have your gut tube, and this is going to be the very beginnings of our primary heart field, our primitive tubes, which are going to eventually fuse together, which we will get into in a future photo. This is just breaking it down. So that mesoderm we were talking about. So this is just another photo with our neural tube, which is going to become the brain and the spinal cord. And then we've got our mesoderm here. This is going to be broken down into a few places, into a few things, but the lateral plate mesoderm is, the heart is going to be specifically this splanchnic area here. So question 2, which of the following anatomical structures arises from the primary heart field of a developing embryo, or the cardiogenic area, which is that area I showed you on the photo up towards the head region of the developing embryo?
And can you see the those responses now, Savvy?
No, but
Okay, no worries. We could
you
still read
want?
them out to you.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. We're smarter than technology. We can figure this out.
That's exactly right.
I'll end around 70%.
Alrighty, so it looks like for choice A, we had about a third. Choice B, we had 20%. Choice C was 7%. And choice D was 40%.
All right. Well, good job, everyone. The correct answer is B. So let's look at that breakdown and talk about this a little bit. So here we have our primary heart field. This is the photo you saw earlier, and this is a coronal view. So again, like I think one of the hardest things to do is just orienting yourself into the spatial view of the image. So I talked about the transverse view being like a bagel, which we, cut horizontally, and we're looking at that top half. I think of the coronal view almost like a loaf of bread. So let's assume that we're looking at a loaf of bread, and maybe 4 slices into the loaf, we just take that loaf right up out we take that slice of bread right up out of the loaf, and we're just looking at it more front to back, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. So here you can see this is our gut tube, and this is our beginnings of our 2 primitive heart tubes. What's going to happen is those 2 primitive tubes at around days 20 and 21 are going to undergo something called lateral folding. And after that, they're going to fuse together into 1 heart tube. So we go from 2 tubes into 1 tube because of lateral folding and a fusion here. You can see this is your pericardial cavity, which eventually in an adult anatomical structure is going to be where the heart is sitting in the body. We talked about the different layers of the heart earlier in this Zoom session, and this is going to be the myocardium. And when we have this primitive tube, we don't actually have the blood flow going from our right to left like we talked about earlier. Right now, our blood flow is actually coming up through our early sinuses and it's going out. So if we look at it here, our heart tube, we've got our blood. Here's a little thing I drew. So our blood is flowing in through our venous sinuses, and it's going to flow out here. So it's just going straight in one way and out the other. And once we form this primitive heart tube, which is important to note that the heartbeat is going to begin on day 22, we're going to get these 5 regions that are going to develop in this heart tube, and they're going to be labeled. So the 5 regions are the truncus arteriosus, the bulbus cordus, the ventricle, the primitive ventricle, the primitive atrium, and the sinus venosus. Like I said, our blood is going to be flowing from this sinus venosus out through the truncus arteriosus. And each of these structures are going to develop into further things. So the primary heart field is going to give rise to just 2 structures, and that's going to be our left ventricle and some parts of the atria. So here you can see this is going to be the area that becomes our left ventricle. I also can't see if there are any questions in the chat. So I know that this can get into a lot of details. So if there are, feel free to stop me at any time. So now that we talked a little bit about the primary heart field, we're going to talk and dive into what's called the secondary heart field. And earlier, this next question is, the truncus arteriosus will give rise to what developed anatomical structure? And that truncus arteriosus is one of those 5 structures we just talked about earlier.
All right, they did really good with this one. All right, so choice A was 12%, choice B was 71%, and choice C was 18%.
All right, right, great job. Yeah, you got it right. It's the pulmonary trunk. So I think this is kind of expanding on the image I drew earlier, but I'm going to take some time to break this down because I think that this is like a really good thing to know when it comes to cardiac embryology. So like I said earlier, the secondary heart field is now where we are. The primary heart field was that cardiogenic area where we had our mesoderm migrating up toward the cranial or the head portion of the developing embryo. And as we're developing, we've got our primary and primitive heart tube, which is going to be having our 5 sections. So the earlier question was the truncus arteriosus, and that is going to develop into your ascending aorta and your pulmonary trunk. I like to think of it like it has the word trunk in it, truncus arteriosus, so you know it's going to be your aorta, which is an artery, and the big trunks of the heart. So those are going to be the 2 structures that arise from here, are truncus arteriosus. Our bulbus cordis is going to become the right ventricle. Now, I labeled this area, which is called the primitive ventricle, as having our right ventricle and our left ventricle. But without getting too tied down into the details, essentially our right ventricle kind of comes from this little section. Ooh, my bad. Our right ventricle kind of comes from this little section here, and it's going to kind of form up with the bulbus cordis and become our eventual right ventricle. Our left ventricle is going to form from that primitive ventricle, which is going to be this area right here. And then our atrium, our right and left atrium, are going to form from the primitive atriums. And the sinus venosus is just going to kind of fold back a little bit. So you can see here, if you think of the letter S, if you have like notes near you and you want to just draw the letter S out or just think about it in your head, we're going to have some folding that's going to happen. And that is how we call it cardiac looping. That is how this singular tube is going to eventually become what kind of looks like and resembles the adult heart that you've been seeing up until this point. So this is all occurring around weeks 4 to 5. I probably should have been specifying a timeline a little bit more. So at around week 3 or day 28 day 21 is about when the primitive heart tube and the primary heart field are forming, but now we've progressed along a little bit more, and these structures are forming around weeks 4 to 5. So when it comes to cardiac looping, the reason that this can happen is because our ventricle is actually forming quicker than the rest of the heart. So if you think about the S, the top portion of the S is going to be our truncus arteriosus and that those atrias, and the bottom part of the S is going to be our ventricle. So what's going to happen is that ventricle moves anterior or more towards the front, and it goes to the right, as you can see by the arrow. The atria are going to go posterior or towards the back, and superior, which means up. So just to reiterate what I said, the ventricle is going to go forward and to the right, and the ventricle is going to be the bottom. So here it is, forward and to the right. And then the atria are going to be posterior and superior. And that's how we get what is more like the adult form of our heart today. At this point, our blood flow is going to start to shift a little bit. It's not going to be just going straight in and straight out, but we'll get into that in the next photo. So question 4. As the baby's heart develops, the walls form to divide it into 4 chambers. This process is referred to as what?
We've got some serious embryology rock stars in this group tonight. All right, and polls are closing. All right, so we got 22% for choice B. We had none for A, 22% for B, 56% for C, and 22% for D.
Yes, so good job, guys. The correct answer is C. So cardiac looping is what we just talked about earlier, and that's just where the heart is going to start shifting around anteriorly and posteriorly so that our atria and our ventricles kind of start looking, getting into anatomical positions that look like an adult heart. Differentiation was probably a little tricky, but that just means that our cells are differentiating into different things. And the correct answer here is septation, which is the definition. Our walls are forming to divide the heart into 4 chambers. So like I said, our septation is dividing our heart tube into 4 separate heart chambers. I drew another photo here. So we're going to kind of zoom in because this has a lot of moving parts and we're just going to take it one at a time. So I like to think about septation as a team. And we have some key players going on here to go from the primitive tube we saw all the way to this. The first few key players I want to talk about are going to be in our atrial septation, because this is going to be our atrium. And this is kind of like, in my mind, the loaf of bread I was talking about. I view this as almost like a coronal view where I'm taking a slice out of that loaf of bread and I'm just looking at one slice of the heart. This could be the front, or we're looking at it front to back, if that makes sense. So we're just going to zoom in. These are the atria, these are the ventricles, and right now we're going to talk about our atria down here and how we get a right atrium and a left atrium. So one of the first players we're going to talk about here is our septum primum. This is just meaning septum for septation, primum for first. So this is going to be the first septation. It's going to be made of a few different cellular structures, but I kind of like to think about it as almost the mesoderm or the myocardial wall coming down from the roof of the heart, because this will be almost like the top. This is this part right here, and it just comes down. And we have another structure down here towards, I would say, this middle section of the heart called the endocardial cushions. These are also made of a few different players. I don't know how deep into that you need to know, but one of them is neural crest cells and some mesenchymal cells. But what's going to happen is this septum primum is going to form down and the endocardial cushions are going to come up. And they're going to leave a little hole, and that first hole is going to be the ostium primum. Now, eventually they are going to fuse, and that ostium primum is going to go away, and that's when you'll get the endocardial cushions will keep growing up, and our septum primum is going to start to degenerate. But once this degenerates, we're going to get something called the septum secundum, and it's just the exact same thing from the septum, and it is the second for secundum. So that's going to come down to the right, specifically to the right of our septum primum, and this is going to be the beginning of that blood flow from the right to the left that you're going to see. So once this has degenerated and this has formed down, we're going to have what we call our foramen ovale, and that's just going to be a little opening in the embryologic heart that's going to cause, and we're getting into a little bit of physics here, but it's going to cause our blood flow, which used to be coming straight from the sinus venosus to out the truncus arteriosus, but now that we've got some walls forming, we're going to have a greater pressure on this right side, and that's going to force the blood flow through this foramen ovale and into the left atrium. That's what I said here. This is going to be the beginning of our fetal blood shunting. So down here in the ventricle, you also have some septation that's going to be occurring. It's going to be similar, but there's actually going to be less moving parts. I think that ventricular septation makes a little more sense. So you're going to have a muscular portion and a membranous portion. So the muscular interventricular septum, just using this image, is going to arise from the bottom of the heart, and our membranous portion is going to come from these endocardial cushions, and they're going to come down, and then they're going to fuse, and that's going to form our ventricular septation. So the endocardial cushions have a really big role to play here. They're like a whole team player. They're going to be coming up to help septate our atria, but they're also going to be growing down to help septate the ventricles, and this is going to be occurring around 4 to 7. With these things, I don't know if y'all have to know any of this, but I think it's just really cool to talk about anyway. If some of these things go wrong, that's how you can get some of the medical conditions. If you've ever heard of an ASD or an atrial septal defect or a VSD or a ventricular septal defect, that's what this is. It's where our cushions and our septums didn't properly fuse together. So you get a little hole that's left in the heart, either between the atria or between the ventricles. Another example would be if the cardiac looping doesn't occur properly and our truncus arteriosus, which will become our pulmonary trunk and our ascending aorta, you can get transposition of the great arteries, which basically means that our aorta is going to start on one side and then it's going to flip and go to the other side. And our pulmonary trunk is going to start on one side and flip. And so they'll kind of go like this during the cardiac looping. And so that's how you get some of that pathology there, which I think is just really cool to talk about. But that is pretty much embryology of the heart. Like I said, this is just one little snapshot of a lot of things that are going on at the same time, and it's got a lot of moving parts. So just to summarize what we were talking about, this kind of occurs from week 3 to week 7 or week 8. You're going to start with your primitive heart tube and the cardiac area, the primitive cardiac area, and it's going to form one tube. Two tubes that are eventually going to form one tube. And that one tube is going to have blood that flows down and just straight up. Eventually, you're going to get cardiac looping, which means you're just going to form an S with the heart. The ventricles are going to push the atrium back, and you're going to start seeing this heart shape that we're more used to. And then you're going to get septation of the heart, which is what's going to help form the blood track that we know today. Yeah, and so that's it. Does anyone have any questions for me?
Savvy, there is a really good question here.
All right.
And I want to make sure I get it here. I lost it here. Why would it be necessary to shunt blood by using the foramen ovale in early heart development?
Yeah, well, I went all the way out. Let me go back to that picture. That's a really good question. So the foramen ovale actually is an embryonic structure. It is eventually going to close, but the reason that it's important here while you're still an embryo is because this little foramen ovale is the hole that's allowing communication between the right atrium and the left atrium. Without this, we're not going to get a pressure difference. And so the blood is, because things go from a high pressure to a low pressure. So this foramen ovale, leaving this little hole open, is going to cause all the blood that's forming here, that's collecting here, to be pushed through the foramen ovale here into the left atrium. So this is specifically playing the role of causing, like I said, I wish I had it here. So we started with blood that's just coming straight, and it's kind of just going just from bottom to top. This foramen ovale is what's beginning that fetal blood shunt and causing us to stop going from bottom to top and to start going from our right to our left. It's also, we don't have a full pulmonary trunk and aorta yet, so it's kind of bypassing that system just for now, and just sending our blood from the right atria to the left atria.
Sammy, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Hey, okay. Well, it wasn't a question, but I'm serious about that cardiac looping. That's how I remember that. Little Sammy grows big Sammy, or the C grows legs. But what I was saying, when you mentioned VSD and ASD, atrial septal defect and ventricular septal defect, I actually used that on one of my med exams. I actually had this rubber band I used to do, so the anatomy in my med exams for UMC at the hospital there at the same time. And I actually used the septal wall. I made a septal wall out of the heart because I drew a heart on my paper. And that's how I kind of remembered septation, but it was just like a little thing that kind of, anywho, it was just like my little mnemonic way of remembering it. But yeah, that was really it. Anywho, yeah, so I'm done yapping. Okay, bye.
No, thanks for sharing. Yeah, I think that that's a really wonderful way to remember it. I also really love to, if I can understand like what can go wrong or why something is happening, then that means that you really know what's going on in the embryology. So having a story and saying, well, if I know I have an atrial septal defect, then what didn't happen? So I think it's really wonderful that you were able to make that connection.
Yeah, and I had to know what goes right before I knew what goes
Yeah.
wrong. So that was also,
Yeah,
but I love
exactly.
making stories about it. It makes it even more fun. Like the Sammy grows, or the little C grows legs, because I mean the C kind of looks like that. The C is on top of the little S if you think about it. So it was just for the cardiac looping and the septation. But that's it. Thank you.
Okay.
One thing
Another
I'll throw up there too is the that final lecture objective going through the foramen ovale, for example, that is considered one of our regional objectives. So I think it's good we're discussing it now, but just know if you're finding that content now and it's feeling intimidating, just know that you have more time to get to that content. If you focus on the first two ones for the local competition, I think that's good. But as you guys have seen with embryology, I think the more repetition is better. So I think it's a really good thing that we've started that discussion now. But again, no stress, we will get there.
Okay, we had another question from Rashab. Are you implying that the right atrium is a smaller cavity than the left atrium to facilitate that pressure difference?
Yeah, so I might be wrong about this, so feel free to correct me. I don't think that the right atrium is necessarily a smaller cavity at this point. I think there's just more inside of the right atrium. And what I mean by more is there's more blood flowing into this right atrium. So it's kind of like thinking of it like an hourglass. On the right atrium, all of the sand is here, and we're trying to get that sand over here. So that's kind of how I think of it.
And I see a good question in there about what study resources do you use? I know Ninja Nerd was mentioned in the comments, and for previous topics, not just embryology, but histology and anatomy, love Ninja Nerd. I think that's great. Savannah, do you have any other, ones that you recommend that you found really helpful when you were going through this for the first time?
Yeah, I definitely did use Ninja Nerd. I think he breaks it down really well. Sometimes the time of his videos, they're like 45 minutes, 50 minutes, and that can be a little bit intimidating to me. So if I don't have as much time, there's a YouTube channel that I like that I think gives it doesn't always go into all the details, but I think it does give a really good overview. They're called Bite Size Med. I think they spell bite with a Y. But if you look them up on YouTube, her videos are shorter, and I think they give a really good overview. And I definitely use her as a resource too.
And bite size is more what you guys need to focus on at this point anyway. So yeah, I think that's really good. And we've seen that channel too. I think that's a good one. So another question here is, last year in the donor lab, I held a heart with heart disease and I noticed it had a thick layer of fat over it. Does this make it harder for the heart to beat? And is this fat covering permanent, or can a lot of exercise and healthy eating take away this fat?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question and a great observation to have made. So it kind of depends. There is a normal, a little bit of fat around the heart. There is like a normal variation to that. But when you get too much fat around the heart, that can be indicative of like coronary heart disease, which means there's probably also fat inside of the vessels. And that would be a bad thing, because just like the water hose analogy that we were talking about earlier, our heart vessels, the arteries and things like that, they like to be just a regular hose. But when you get fat that clogs the inside of them, it's kind of like putting your thumb over the hose. So the heart isn't able to be as efficient. The blood flow can kind of back up a little bit. And I don't remember the rest of the question. Does it make it harder for the heart to work, or?
It was, is this fat covering permanent, or can a lot of exercise and healthy eating take away this fat?
That might be, I don't know if I know the fully true answer to that. I know there's still a lot of research going into questions like this. I don't think that there's ever a true full reverse to things like that. I know that once you know about it, you
Did we lose her?
measures such as exercising more, which will foods and fatty foods, and that can also help. It's more of once it's there, and you just want to try and prevent it from accumulating anymore.
Yeah, there's a number of factors that can go into that. And I see that Sammy put in there too, is there's some hereditary factors that might make it you know, harder. If the cause is coming from diet, then absolutely addressing that can help reduce that. And there's different metrics that you can get to assess what the visceral fat level is, and that usually doesn't just apply to the heart. It's normally correlated then with other organs that could be impacted by that as well. So, but yeah, I think just good conversation there, and that a number of things can impact it. And it might not necessarily just be diet. It very much could be diseases and genetics that could fuel that, and you know, kind of makes it a case-to-case dependence there. Any final questions as we wrap up with our time with the, oh, I see one here. We got one I missed. What kinds of heart diseases can be caused by a deformation in atrial septation? That's a good question.
That is a really good question. So we did talk about a couple of them, an ASD and a VSD. So that's an atrial septal defect and a ventricular septal defect. And that's kind of when your endocardial cushions and your septum primum or septum segundum, both of those, when they don't fuse properly and they don't close this hole, that's when you can have a hole left in the heart. So that can happen here in the atrium, but it can also happen down here in the ventricle. So if these two things, the one rising from the bottom of the heart and the top of the heart, don't fuse to the middle, essentially, you can get a hole that's left over there in the heart.
And the ones that you had mentioned too are, if any of you guys are advancing onto that regional competition, in our patient cases that we have for you, the standardized patients that we have, you'll notice that that exact question that you just asked is actually one of those cases as well. So that's a really good on-target question, and a lot of how we apply the embryology to medicine in terms of thinking, well, what would go wrong if that didn't happen properly? So making sure that that does in fact finish that septum, so that we don't end up with that mixing back and forth once your lungs are developed, because then you're mixing with your deoxygenated and oxygenated blood, as Savvy was saying. So I see a question here that's I can answer, is if it was covered in previous sessions, if there's any resources that you could use to study for the competition. So there's a number that you can use. I highly recommend you go through to start our YouTube channel and go through last year's YouTube videos before you come to the sessions. If you don't get to do that, if time just isn't on your side with that, please just come anyways and just see what you can pick up as we're coming through here. Of course, you're always welcome to see the recordings from this year where we're applying it. But again, I think the ones where we really dive into the content from previous years can be really helpful. I think the learning objectives that we have on our website can be beneficial as well, just so that you know what you're responsible for as you guys are navigating external resources, because the other resources you find on various YouTube channels, for example, might go more in the weeds and things like that than we necessarily are asking you to for the anatomy. So just keep that in mind as you guys are using external resources. And then, of course, feel free to comment on our YouTube videos. Feel free to send us emails. Ask your anatomy teachers if you have them. And just let us know how we can help you. The Toltech resource was one that we went through also at the beginning of the session. And I highly recommend that you check out also the Joe videos. If there's anything that you can find there, you know, that will help you with your scientific methods and technique with that as well. So, oh, and I see another person reminded me, of course, we have atlases that are also helping identify some of these structures as well. So thank you for putting that in there too. I've seen a number of things that are really cool that's popping up. One that I saw was that there's a Quizlet, I think, for at least a couple of the tutoring sessions that we had done that are publicly available. So I think it's really cool that you guys are starting to share resources like that. I believe in the Google Classroom we have it so that you are welcome to post things as well. If I'm mistaken on that, then I apologize. But I think you should also be able to share resources in there too if you think of anything. That's all I have. Any final questions in the last 5 minutes that we have? I love what you said, Dr. Frank. Have a super weekend. Don't curb the enthusiasm. That is the truth. Everyone has been so just great in the questions that you guys are asking. I want to thank our presenters again for all the hard work you put into prepping these questions and practice materials for our participants. So thank you so much, Laura and Deeba and Savvy. And as always, thank you to our moderator, Dr. Frank, for helping keep us on time and organized and all the in-between. So if that's all we got for tonight, then I just want to say thank you again, everybody, for everything you're doing, and just let us know how we can help you get to where you want to be in the anatomical sciences. So have a great evening, everybody.
Keep being awesome.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.